If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Democrat Lauren Arthur from suburban Kansas City has touched off a minor political earthquake in Missouri and nationally with her huge victory in the June 5th special election to choose a new state senator. The 17th district had been represented by a Republican for more than a decade, and its voters had backed Donald Trump for president in 2016. Arthur carried the district by 20 points, which has prompted both parties to closely examine how she did it. We caught up with Arthur in the Missouri Capitol as she prepares to move into her new Senate office after spending 4 years in the State House. Let's cue the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, a candid conversation with the Show Me State's biggest political newsmakers.
I'm Jason Rosenbaum.
And I'm Joe Mannies.
Elections should be about your accomplishments. What have you done to qualify you for the position, and why are you qualified to run?
I'm going to push back on these regulators.
I'm doing this for the people.
I was encouraged along the way, not just by my family, but by a lot of teachers and professors, and knew when I was in college that I would run for office someday.
We're very excited about the prospect of having some more free market solutions.
Even though after the conversation, I still might not agree.
We want our listeners to get a real sense of what drives these people.
They're actually people with a story to tell.
Hi, this is Joe Mannies with St. Louis Public Radio. I'm the fill-in host this week for the Politically Speaking podcast. My co-host and general tech wizard, Jason Rosenbaum, is on maternity leave. So I've taken the opportunity, I'm in the office of State Senator Gina Walsh, to interview the newest state senator-elect who's like the buzz of the nation.
Hi, great to be here. Sorry that we can't do it in my house office. There's not enough room for everyone.
And give us your name.
I am Lauren Arthur.
Okay. A Democrat from
Kansas City, and I won election during the special election in Kansas City. My Senate district covers most of Clay County, and I'm very excited about the opportunity to serve in the Senate. I served 4 years in the House, and very much look forward to working on issues in the Senate now.
Now, one of the reasons there's so much buzz about your victory about, a week ago, is that, A, it was by 20 points over a fairly well-known Republican colleague, Kevin Corlew.
Right.
And second, this is a suburban district. So the suburbs, many believe, and I'm among them, believe that that's where the 2018 midterm elections are going to be played out, that the suburbs are going to decide arguably who's going to win statewide, and it could determine who's is in control of the U.S. Senate. The suburbs, it's going to depend on the percentage that come out for one party or the other, but also turnout.
Right.
And I've got all these theories that I won't bore people with right now about how I think that the Republicans would like to see a lower turnout in St. Louis County, which is a whole nother story, but it's related in some ways to your victory and what it says. Well, first, when will you be sworn in?
There's still conversation around that. Very likely I'll be sworn in during our veto session in September. Right now, the Secretary of State is still certifying the results, but quite possibly veto session. However, we're working through when that date will actually be.
So if you're sworn in during veto session, does that mean you will only be able to run one more time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's some of what we're working through and trying to figure out right now.
So how long will your term in this particular term last?
I would run for re-election in November of 2020.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. So without further ado, you want to talk a little bit about your victory, how you did it?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, the district that I now represent is truly a swing district. It's one of the last purple counties in Missouri, and I think that's why so many people watched it with such great interest. Like you said, it was held by a Republican for the last 13 years, so it's a really exciting thing to see that seat flipped from red to blue. But also it was a district that went to Trump by 4 points, but Jason Kander won by 55% of the vote as well.
Yeah, and just so our listeners know, Jason Kander was the Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate in 2016, narrowly lost statewide. Go ahead. And before you go too far, I also want you to give our listeners a little bit of history about you.
Sure.
Where you're from, why you got into politics. Well, how old are you?
That's a great question, and I ask myself that every day about why did I decide to go into this. But I am 30 years old. I am lucky enough to represent the district where I grew up. So, my parents are constituents. That is as much fun as it sounds. But I get to represent neighbors. I get to represent friends and family and people I went to school with. And that's a really great honor to make sure that those people have a strong advocate and a strong voice in their state government. So I grew up in the area. I went to all of our public schools. I decided to go away for college. And when I graduated, I knew that I wanted to make a difference. And initially, I thought I would make a difference on the other side of the world. And I met with someone who was a recruiter for a program called Teach for America. And he said, I think it's great that you want to go on the other side of the world to make a difference, but there's a lot of need in Kansas City as well. And I really believe that education can be a transformational experience for people. And I wanted every child to have a great education, have all of those opportunities available to them. And I thought that I could make the most impact in a classroom. And so I taught 6th and 8th grade, and still love, and am still in contact with a lot of my students. And it was a pretty eye-opening experience that so many of them were coming to school without their basic needs being met. And I saw a lot of issues involving child poverty. And so my kids would come to school tired, and they would come to school hungry, having not eaten anything the night before. And it made me realize that a lot of the decisions that affected their lives were being made in Jefferson City. And I questioned some of those decisions. And all of that aside, we also were expected to do certain things in our school. And
you mean as far as teachers providing your own supplies?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I can remember going to an administrator and saying, hey, there's a great new book. I think it would get kids really excited about reading, and I think it would be a really engaging story. And there was a lot of pushback about buying this new classroom set of books when already we didn't have all of the resources that some of the other wealthier districts had that were around us. And so I wanted to advocate for those students and decided to run for office. I also saw that young women were completely unrepresented at the time. So I was the first millennial woman elected. I was the only woman in her 20s at the State House. And I thought that I could provide a new perspective and a different voice.
Now, during your 4 years in the House, what have you achieved, A, and B, what have been the challenges? Because, the Democrats are in a minority, very small minority.
Mm-hmm. I understood that it was important for me to learn about the rules and learn about the process. And my first year, I just focused on observing how things worked. And I think that ended up working to my advantage. I also spent a lot of time building relationships. And relationships both within my caucus, but especially relationships with people across the aisle. And there are plenty of things on which we disagree, but there are also areas where we can work together. And I think it's important that we go out to dinner with different groups of people and we try to get to know each other as people, even though, sometimes debate on the floor can be very heated. It's important to know who I'm working with, my colleagues, on a personal level, I believe. And so because I've built those relationships, it's a little easier to have conversations about would you consider hearing this bill in committee, or would you consider co-sponsoring this bill and helping me get it along in the process. And actually this year, like you said, it's difficult for minorities to pass bills, but I'm really proud that even with a giant target on my back, because I was in this very competitive state Senate seat, or state Senate election, I was able to get 2 pieces of legislation across the finish line.
What were they?
The first bill involved foster care kids. So under the old law, basically kids only under the age of 10 in foster care were required to receive preventative screenings and wellness screenings, and they were required to go every 2 years. So this bill changed it such that kids, anyone in the foster care system, so anyone under the age of 18 would receive those preventative screenings for both health and mental health wellness screenings. And it was according to something called the periodicity schedule put forward by the American Pediatrics Association. Basically, it means foster care kids are going to receive better care, more appropriate care. And then the second bill involves tax payment or interest on tax payments. So if as a taxpayer I send in my taxes late, I'm required to pay serious interest plus fees. If the Department of Revenue is late in sending me my tax returns, they were only required to pay less than 1%. And so this legislation levels the playing field, and it expects the Department of Revenue to pay the same kinds of interest that as taxpayers we're expected to pay. And hopefully it means that people will receive their taxes in a more timely way, that they're not delayed in receiving those tax returns. But if for some reason they receive their tax returns late, then they'll receive fair compensation for that.
Now, did you get any boost from then Governor Eric Greitens or his wife, Sheena Greitens? Because I know foster care had been one of her issues.
Yeah, it was a part of that initiative proposal with, I think there were 20 initiatives, all intended to help kids in foster care, and they asked, or the department asked if I would consider sponsoring that bill.
So what prompted you first to even consider running for the state Senate? When did you decide that you were going to do this? And then talk a bit about, we don't always get into the ins and outs of campaigns, but I think in this case we do.
Okay.
So if you can talk about when you decided to run, I mean, how do you go about this in a special election, especially in a district that's been held by a Republican for more than a decade, even though it is technically a swing district?
Right. Well, the first conversation I had with was my husband, and I said, is this something we should consider? And we weighed the pros and cons, and we understood that it was quite a risk at the time. There was now looking back, there was a great margin of victory, but at the time, it was a very risky move. But I believe in risk-taking, and I saw that I could make a much bigger impact in the Senate and have a greater ability to make a difference in the Senate, and I thought that it would be worth it. So I called other state reps from the area. I expressed an interest, and one of the first people I called was Representative John Carpenter, who also is a state rep from Clay County. He has more seniority. He had more money. I said, and we're personal friends. We've known each other a long time. I said, if you want to run for this seat, then I'll support you 100%. And he decided that he wasn't going to run for it, and thankfully and very graciously supported my candidacy. So I spent a lot of time calling Democratic Central Committee members, and they are ultimately the decision makers in determining who gets the nomination for the Democratic candidate. So I called through them several times. I had built relationships with them over the years, but I asked for them to support my candidacy, and I shared with them what I had planned in terms of a campaign. and spent a lot of time in a room making fundraising phone calls and trying to build some of the infrastructure so that if I got the nomination, I would be able to hit the ground running.
Now, when did they decide?
They decided March 1st.
Okay, so you've got from March 1st
Yeah.
until June 5th
Right.
to do this.
Yep. And
Okay.
so we knew that the other side would be very well funded, and I focused quite a bit of time trying to raise enough money to make the race competitive. We also had an incredible field campaign, and we had dedicated field organizers who would call volunteers and ask them to take shifts. I think there was a lot of momentum and energy on our side, but I want people to understand that this win was possible because people showed up and they put in the work. And so we had people throughout the entire week making phone calls. And I remember being in our headquarters and seeing workers get off their shift. Our headquarters was across the street from the Ford plant. We were right next door to the UAW hall, and workers would get off their shift, come pick up a packet, and knock doors. We had families on the weekends come in and decide to canvass neighborhoods together. And so they were especially motivated. They saw this as an opportunity to flip a seat. And I also think that they were pretty disappointed by what they saw in Jefferson City this year and what they had seen from Jefferson City over the last several years. And so it was a team effort. We had people around the state writing postcards and mailing them into the district so voters would be aware that there was an election on June 5th. That was one of the biggest obstacles. It's such an unusual day for an election that just drawing awareness to the fact that there was an election was an important part. But in the end, we knocked over 50,000 doors. We made over 150,000 phone calls, and we wrote thousands and thousands of postcards. And I think our field game won, and is the reason why we had such a huge margin of victory.
Now, often, there's always been this reputation that Republicans do so much better in off-year or special elections, especially because they tend to be better organized and are more concentrated on doing what's needed to get their voters out. Mm-hmm. Now, in this case, obviously, you did so much better than, let's say, the typical Democrat in the past in trying to get for a special election. Did the state party help? Was there just things that you knew as far as getting people to help out? Do you think it's the energized base? I'm just curious.
I make the joke that I was just along for the ride. And I knocked a lot of doors myself, but I am really grateful to Stephen Weber and the state party. They stepped up and played a huge role. And, just as a friend, Stephen Weber, who's run a state Senate race, could give advice about, I make sure that you're putting this person in place by this date, and he would offer that kind of advice. But they also ended up playing a financial role, and so they really supported me and my campaign in so many different ways, and many of which I don't even know, right? And then I'd also say that Senator Claire McCaskill, to her credit, she also recognized this as a really important race, and we were able to open our headquarters in our campaign office early because she put in and she understood how important it was to have that resource and put some backing.
How much money or in kind did you get from the senator, and how much money or in kind contribution did you get from the state party?
So the senator, she maxed out. And so,
which is like
$2,600, yeah. And she actually was one of the first people to write me a campaign contribution. And I think it was both because I really needed the money early, and also it was quite symbolic that she really wanted to see me succeed in this race. But there was a lot of different groups who saw this as an important win, and It's not just the state party, it's not just Claire McCaskill, but a lot of labor groups endorsed in this race. Not only endorsed, but expected their members to show up and knock doors or make phone calls. And so we had a really diverse coalition, of which I'm really proud that so many people stepped up and really put in the work to make it possible.
Are there any lessons for Missouri Democrats to take from your huge victory?
Yeah, there is momentum, and people are eager and inclined to get involved, and it's really important that we're capitalizing on that. I also think we focused our campaign on a message that affects working families.
What was that message?
Basically that the people in Jefferson City have, for the last several years, prioritized the pet projects of billionaires and corporations, and it's been to the detriment of everyone else. And I think that there was this sharp juxtaposition that told that story, where this year, while everyone was distracted by Eric Greitens and his scandals and misconduct, the legislature partially repealed prevailing wage, passed paycheck deception, a number of initiatives that are meant to hurt working families and the labor community, while also then, cutting our corporate tax rate from 6.25% down to 4%, so that now we have the second lowest corporate tax rate in the country. And not to mention that they did it with such haste that we almost blew a $60 million hole in the budget because that fiscal note hadn't been correctly vetted. And so I just question the kinds of decisions being made and, whose interest the General Assembly works in.
Now, what do you think that your victory says to Republicans?
I hope for Republicans have supermajorities in the House and the Senate, and sometimes it feels like they govern without any consideration. The majority of Missourians are in the middle, and many lean left. And I feel like we've seen more extreme legislation passed. We've seen legislation that isn't always properly vetted passed. And I hope that, going forward, they'll remember that this isn't just a red state. There are a lot of people with varied backgrounds and varied interests who also deserve a say and consideration as we're passing legislation. And I hope at the end of the day, people govern from a more moderate, centrist place.
Now, did the social issues play any part at all in your campaign, or was it pretty much an economic message?
We stayed focused on pocketbook issues, the kinds of issues that families discuss around the table. It was really interesting. I will spend a little time describing it because I'm sure people in St. Louis didn't realize the kind of campaign that was being run against me. But there were 2 TV ads and hundreds of thousands of dollars spent in these attack ads against me. The first said that I was ultra-liberal and super partisan, and while also saying that I cut programs that help kids and seniors, which is a little bit of an incoherent message. But more than that, there was a picture of a toddler throwing a tantrum, and they said that Lauren Arthur is a temper tantrum thrower. And so I heard from a lot of women. I found that incredibly misogynistic and not born in reality. I've kept a very cool head during my 4 years in the legislature, and so it was sort of this odd non sequitur, but they decided to go with that, and I think there were a lot of women who found that offensive. Then the second ad, unfortunately, there was a shooting in the Northland, in the district that I now represent, and it was...
What, was it a school shooting, or...?
It was, there were a few people shot and one person died, and the shooter was a 4-time deportee, and it's a tragic situation, but the ad connected me to that shooting and said that I was in some ways responsible because I had voted for amnesty, and that it was all based around fear-mongering around the issue of immigration. Now, you and I know that in terms of state policy, we really have no authority, and I couldn't even vote for amnesty if that's not a possibility at the state level. And so it was very misleading, it was very dishonest, and it exploited a tragic situation that was very fresh in people's minds. And, you know, there are family members, there are friends who saw this ad and also took offense. So those were the kinds of issues that they tried to attack me with. They also mentioned abortion and guns. And at the end of the day, I'm very proud that the people in the senatorial district rejected those kinds of political messages and, in my opinion, listened to their better angels and rejected that muck.
What sort of ads did you run? I take it you were also on TV.
Yes. The first was just an introductory ad. It talked about my passion for education and my passion for making sure that that everyday Missourians have a strong voice in the legislature. And then the second ad was a contrast ad, and it talked about how my opponent has sort of preferenced corporations ahead of constituents, and the kinds of legislation that he sponsored gives employers more power and employees fewer rights. And so we went with that message of, and you know, I think that it's borne out in his record that there is sort of a preference for corporations over people.
So who, you got a lot of congratulations. Anything that struck you as far as who called?
Governor Mike Parson made a very gracious phone call that night and wished me congratulations, and I think he has restored a lot of decency to the governor's office, which I appreciate. I think we should have more civility in political discourse, and so it's nice to see a return to that. And you know, I will say he's a very conservative person. We have supermajorities in the House and the Senate, and I expect that, you know, we'll govern very much from a Republican, you know, more conservative place. But it is nice to see that there was an effort put into reaching out, and I appreciate it. And Ryan Silvey also called and wished me congratulations as well, and we have plans to sit down sometime in the next few weeks, and I'll be picking his brain over you know, what he would recommend in terms of representing that area.
Senator, your name is still on the ballot for re-election this fall. How will that be handled? Do you know?
Right now we're working on getting a court order to have my name removed, and there has been a Democrat and a Republican who filed for the election in November, and once my name is removed, hopefully in the next few days, then the Democrat will go on to succeed me, and he has my full endorsement, and I look forward to working with him in the legislature.
What's his name?
Wes Rogers.
Okay. And I'm also here with my colleague, who I've kind of hogged the mic a bit, Marshall Griffin, who is based here in Jeff City. Marshall, is there any particular questions you'd like to ask the senator-elect?
Well, speaking as kind of the engineer of today's podcast, when you first heard that you had won the special election, what was the first thought going through your mind when you heard that you were going to be replacing or succeeding Ryan Silvey as the 17th District Senator?
I'm just so grateful. I was so excited, very sleep deprived, but really elated about the opportunity. And, you know, it felt like a win that belonged to my volunteers. I was happy for them that their work paid off. And I was really happy for the voters who turned out in June. I got messages from people saying that they were delaying their vacations, or for the first time in 65 years they were voting absentee. And it seemed like voters were especially engaged and excited, and I was happy for them that they also felt so much like they were a part of it. And of course, I'm most excited that I now get to go serve in the Senate and represent an area where I grew up, an area that I love, an area that I want to see do well. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to make that place a little bit better.
I'm sure you are aware of the difference in the way that the House and the Senate work. We've heard criticisms from members of the House about the slow pace of the Senate and how a few senators seem to clog everything up. Have you had a chance to meet any of your future Senate colleagues or to study how you want to approach being a senator?
I don't know if I'll change my approach. Just like I did in the House, I look forward to building relationships with other senators and finding areas where there's common ground and on issues that I think affect constituents in all parts of Missouri. I think there is more of an opportunity to work with people on substantive issues. I like the deliberative process, and I like spending time and thinking deep on issues and making sure that we're doing it correctly. And so I'm really excited. I know in the Senate you may be with someone on this issue, and then the next bill you're enemies with that person. And I like looking at every bill, every piece of legislation, and really thinking through how it's going to affect people back home and how we can make it a little better. And in some cases, take bad legislation and hopefully kill it.
We've seen the time limits, and I guess there are time constraints when a bill's being debated on the House floor, even though some bills get a lot of time. As a senator, you will have an unlimited amount of time, generally speaking, to if you want to get up and talk about something. And I don't know if anyone really likes using the F word, which in the Missouri Senate means filibuster. But if you do take part in a filibuster, have you thought about what you might talk about yet? Any books you've selected you think to read?
Well, I am young, my legs are strong, and I
Good for you.
will be happy to stand up and talk for as long as it takes. But I will spend the summer reading quite a bit, and I'm a history major. I'm a history nerd, and love reading different biographies. I also am a Royals fan. I feel like I can never replace Senator Sylvie. I know he was an avid Royals fan too, but I am happy to carry that mantle and talk about Royals baseball should the need occur.
I think we're just about done here, according to the battery sign on my recorder. I mean, will you be active this fall at all in helping other Democrats, or do you feel like you need to be focused on the seat you just won at this point?
I can do it all. I'm planning on meeting with constituents over the next several months and putting together legislative proposals and setting up a listening tour to get feedback on some of the ideas I have and hopefully to generate and listen to constituents' feedback and ideas for what to work on next year. But aside from that, there are a lot of competitive seats. I think if we had more balance at the State House, we would see better policy, we would see better governance. This election proved that if we have candidates, and we have record number of candidates this year, if we have candidates and if they're willing to work hard and they're willing to talk about issues that affect working families, that they'll stand a pretty good chance to win. So I'll be knocking doors for those candidates, hopefully answering any questions they have, and working to get more Democrats elected, because I think when there's more balance, it serves overall the interest of the state.
Have you been getting much national attention? I mean, I've been seeing it, but have like neither national party figures or national press or whatever been calling you since your victory?
Yeah, it's so surreal. When I hear this campaign and this win discussed, it still feels like they're talking about someone else. So I'm expecting over the next few days this will sink in and it will feel more real. But there's been a lot of attention, and thankfully I have sisters and and parents and a husband who like to keep me grounded and remind me that, this is going to pass, and that there's hard work ahead, and that there are dirty dishes in the sink that we need to take care of too. So keeping my head in check very much so.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Our listeners will be able to read more aside from listening to this podcast, which will be posted the next day or two. Also have a little more detailed web post with it. And you can check out all of our stories at stlpublicradio.org. You can follow me on Twitter at jmannies. That's JMANNIES. You can follow Marshall on Twitter at
Marshall G. Report.
Okay, and you can follow the Senator-elect
at Rep. Lauren Arthur. So we may need a new handle at some point.
Okay. Yeah, you might want to change that to send Lauren Arthur. Also, are you on Facebook? Can
yes,
people follow you?
They can look me up at Lauren Arthur.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Appreciate Senator Gina Walsh's generosity in letting us use her office. And until next time, so long.
The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer. St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on the Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.